you build a race-conscious university. You are then teaching the next generation of scientists at this race-conscious university that their race matters. When in universalism, normative principle of science, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your race is, you can do science. So this is just utterly scary, what I'm going to read here. I skimmed through this earlier today, and I was stunned by it. And dear goodness, I really, really, really hope this doesn't come to the U.S. in any form. But this is a heck of a lot of concerning, I got to admit. This is from Quillette. Anti-Racism as Office Politics Power Play, a Canadian academic case study. So Jonathan Kay wrote this one up for Quillette. And it's really concerning from what I've read so far. So let us read. Last week, 53 top Canadian academic administrators convened in Ottawa for a biannual meeting, a membership meeting of the Universities Canada, a group dedicated to, quote, providing university presidents with a unified voice for higher education. The 89 pages meeting agenda, which was leaked to me after the event, makes for an interesting read. The pandemic has been a challenging period for Canadian universities as the adoption of virtual classrooms has caused some families to wonder whether the traditional bricks and mortar education model is worth the price. Many Canadian schools are financially dependent on foreign students, an income that's in flux now thanks to COVID. In April, Laurentine University in Ontario declared itself insolvent, cut dozens of programs, and laid off about 100 professors, an unprecedented development. Indeed it is. And yet none of these issues is listed on the October 27th Universities Canada meeting agenda. Laurentine University isn't mentioned at all, in fact. And the only substantive reference to the COVID pandemic consists of an aside to the effect of that, quote, women are disproportionately being impacted negatively during the pandemic, end quote. Instead, all of the agenda's main action items are dedicated to social justice. The first item updates attendees on Universities Canada's multi-year effort to draft a statement on, quote, social impact principles. A subsequent action item details the Scarborough National Charter, a document aimed at moving from rhetoric to meaningful, concrete action to address anti-Black racism and to promote Black inclusion. There's also a related item called Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, under which members were asked by formal motion to affirm their commitment to an affirmative action doctrine known as inclusive excellence. Later in the document, there appears an action item relating to principles of Indigenous education and detailing the by now year-and-a-half-long consultation process aimed at renewing Universities Canada's original Indigenous Education Manifesto, which itself was announced with fanfare in 2015 after a year of work. Among the proposed editing refinements are that language be added recognizing the intersectionality of Indigenous identities and that a new preamble be added, quote, acknowledging that Universities Canada and its member institutions are located on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island. The final version, it predicted, will be ready in April 2022. But the agenda's real centerpiece is a 46-page standalone report commissioned by Universities Canada called Building a Race-Conscious Institution, a guide and toolkit for university leaders enacting anti-racist organizational charge. If there was ever woke speak in something, it's right here. Building a race-conscious institution. Race-conscious. Enacting an anti-racist organizational charge. One heck of a contradiction, don't you think? The report's main theme is that university leaders must decisively reject the idea of color blindness, which the author asserts should properly be termed color evasion, in favor of becoming race-conscious individuals who, quote, explicitly reflect on their ethno-racial identity and group membership. They want people to be thinking all the time about what race they belong to. All the time. All the time. And color evasion here, being renamed like that, is color evasion is a bad thing to these people. Being color indifferent, I like that phrasing better. I agree with Carlin on that one. I agree with Carlin Borisenko, go over to her channel on that one, but I actually agree with that. Color indifferent is a better thing to say. Yes, I do see what your skin tone is and what your race is and what have you, but that means nothing to me in how I judge you. That is better than color blindness here, because you cannot literally see You're not blind unless you are literally colorblind or you're blind. You cannot see. You will certainly see somebody's skin tone and what race they are. That you can't get away from. But being color indifferent is a good thing, actually. The author also exhorts the university presidents to, quote, actively examine their personally mediated racial biases, consider their individual experiences with reflect to racism, and acknowledge their relative race-related marginalization or privilege in larger society. To persist in color evasion, the author warns, is to erect discursive barriers to anti-racist organizational change. In other words, you must become race essentialist. You must become race conscious if you are to be anti-racist. Do you see the trap there? Do you see the trap in that? You have to be race conscious to be anti-racist. No, you don't. No, you don't. She's thinking there's only one way to do it. There's only one way to do it. My way's the best to do it. My way's the best to do it. No, it's not. And color evasion is just one of 10 listed, quote, dominant ideologies and pervasive narratives that undermine efforts to counteract racism. Among the other barriers listed by the author are, holy criminy, quote, equal opportunity, tradition, and tolerance. So in other words, you can't have tolerance for different opinions. You can't like equal opportunity for everybody, regardless of that race or sex or gender. The report also contains tangents on white fragility, allyship, and the ethics of care. What the heck is that? Prescribed by critical feminists and anti-racist scholars, as well as instructions regarding the use of certain words and phrases. For instance, representation gaps among students, scholars, and staff in higher education are not achievement gaps, but rather opportunity gaps. There are plenty of diagrams. On one page, readers are instructed to organize their anti-racism efforts into 4 categories: affirmative introspection, self-governance, intercultural literacy, and social architecting. On the next page, they're asked to situate themselves on a 15-point star that sets out the axes of privilege, dominance, and oppression. 3 pages later, racism has become a stepladder with sequential steps indicating bias, stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. A page later, there's a linear chart describing the personal journey from monocultural ignorance through multicultural inclusion, and then on to the promised land of the truly anti-racist conscious elite. Blah. After that comes pie charts, 4 layers of diversity, analyzing your diversity lens, Venn diagrams, conceptualizing cultural safety, and flowcharts, continuous improvement cycle for EDI organizational change. Oh my. Part of me is glad that I can't quite read all of this. Sample of charts. Okay. The conservative case against doctrinaire anti-racist ideology typically focuses on its upstream intellectual influences, including Marxism, postmodern, critical theory, and other movements that present a revolutionary critique of liberal and capitalist societies. But with its PowerPoint style and jargony content, complete with references to best practices, evaluation rubrics, deliverables, synergistic solutions, and strategic planning logic models, building a race-conscious institution often reads more like a send-up of corporate MBA speak than a radical call to arms. In one memorable flourish, readers are instructed that, quote, mechanisms to promote coordinated decentralization will ensure that dedicated and distributed efforts are aligned and synergistic. Words that remind me more of a Dilbert cartoon than anything written by Paulo Freire or Ibram X. Kendi. Let's have a look. So outputs, percent of units EDI plans submitted annually. Oh my goodness. Wow. Value of donor fund designated. How much money are you paying to the EDI effort? Value and proportion of funds allocated for EDI priorities. Extent of analysis in there. So outputs. These are outputs they want. Recognition of awards with EDI criteria. EDG. Government, equity and diversity governance on governing bodies. Self-identified equity, diversity governance on senior and senior leadership. So how many people are there, because they have good governance that's based on equity and diversity, or have institutional documents that articulate these priorities that are right in the strategic documents, all those kinds of things. Curricular diversity, number of courses with EDI-related learning outcomes, percent of academic programs integrating EDI in the curriculum, all these kinds of things in here are what they want for Universities Canada. bear this in mind because I would love to know, and I bet there's probably something somewhere of the like this circulating around there for the U.S., for the U.S. universities. Critical theory is about challenging existing power structures. Yes, critical theory, anything, is about power. But the 53 university presidents and principals who met on October 27th presumably like the current academic power structure just fine, since they're the ones sitting on top of it. And for all the talk of ruthless personal self-interrogation contained in the opening pages of Building a Race-Conscious Institution, its author doesn't seem interested in prodding corner office university administrators to actually surrender their plum posts in favor of less white, less rich, less privileged replacements. Just the opposite. She calls on them to become the vanguard force that suppresses, quote, colorblind ideology and imposes top-down program of anti-racist institutional control. While the language of the report is nominally progressive, the overall tone is deeply conservative. No. Nope. This is where I fundamentally disagree with him on that. That is not conservative. That is not conservative in the slightest. Conservatives would not be building power like that from the top down. Nor would the truly liberal, nor would the libertarians be doing stuff like this to build it race conscious from the top down. That's why I very fundamentally disagree with that. Nope. It is very progressive. It is very left progressive, and it is very Marxian in its idea, because if you're getting into the race-conscious stuff where you're starting to label things as oppressive versus oppressed, it does very much take the Marxian dialect, and that is not something that is in the conservative side of things. I very much disagree with that statement right there. The report's author, McMaster University professor and administrator named Arig al-Shabaya, I don't know how to pronounce that, more on her below, is especially focused on the role of both dedicated senior administrators who implement anti-racism policies on a campus-wide basis and more junior anti-racism champions deputized to act at the level of faculty, schools, and departments. Senior anti-racism officials must be vested with personal agency and a level of authority to influence pan-institutional change, while their junior lieutenants must be adequately compensated through service recognition stipend or salary to lead EDI and anti-racist priorities. After reading Ms. Al-Shabia's report, I looked her up and learned she's McMaster's Associate Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, which is to say exactly the kind of, quote, dedicated senior administrator whom her plan would empower. As for her stipulation that anti-racism officers must be adequately compensated, Ms. Shabia leads by example. According to publicly available records, her 2020 salary and benefits at McMaster total about $249,000. And again, this is the thing. Critical theory, whatever it is about power. It is about more power for them, but it is using the dialectic, Marxian dialectic, to be able to do that. And so she's getting more power for herself. She's getting more power for the administrators who sign on to this stuff. Because it keeps everybody divided, and they can't push back. Building a race-conscious institution demonstrates how deeply anti-racism has penetrated the administrative sinew of the institutional academic culture, to such an extent that it's now difficult to disentangle the radical postures of anti-racist movement from the everyday careerism, bureaucracy, and faculty lounge politics that have pervaded universities since time immemorial. The author's policy prescriptions in particular seem to combine the best of both worlds, with university administrators being urged to weaponize the idiom of anti-racism as a means to impose ideological uniformity, expand their own powers, raise their own salaries, and strip academics of their traditional prerogatives. Last week, I asked Universities Canada to show how much they paid Ms. Al-Shabia, I cannot pronounce her name, and I know I'm not pronouncing it right, to prepare this report. I received no reply. In her report, Ms. Al-Shabia argues that a, quote, trained equity advisor should be personally involved in every hiring decision. She also argues that hiring committee members must be required to complete unconscious bias training. By the way, that doesn't work. See the video on is diversity training effective on this channel. It does. Unconscious bias training doesn't work. That all job applicants must be asked to submit a state of contributions to EDI attestation, that job evaluation criteria must integrate EDI, that interview questions must include assessment of EDI, and that employment equity goals must be prioritized when multiple finalists are considered in the zone of excellence, a model she proposes as a part of a larger counter-narrative to the myth of meritocracy. In other words, no merit. You're deciding a job based upon race, sex, gender, what have you. No merit, no excellence. Mediocrity. All of these race-related mandates and many more besides, it is proposed, would be enforced through an extensive and closely supervised system of checklists, spreadsheets, and reports that academics would be required to submit to senior EDI officials, sample copies of which Ms. Al-Shabia has helpfully included in building a race-conscious institution. All in all, Ms. Al-Shabia lists no fewer than 17 best practices for inclusive excellence in hiring, which taken together would seem to put those, quote, trained equity advisors and the EDI colleagues in the driver's seat on pretty much every personnel decision. Even if a hiring committee were to go rogue, say by assembling a short list on the basis of actual merit, there's a fail-safe entry in Ms. Shabia's best practices catalog that allows for such decisions to be amended post facto so as to advance strong EDG equity-deserving groups. Equity-deserving groups. The oppressor-oppress dialectic is strong with this one because who's the equity-deserving group? In all seriousness. Who's the equity-deserving group in this? Candidates. On the other hand, how often would it even come to that? Remember that we're going to bat for objective, race-neutral evaluation standards is itself described in building a race-conscious institution as prima facie evidence of harboring intent to frustrate anti-racism. We all know what the opposite of anti-racism is. She's constructed this very well, from what Jonathan Kay is describing. She's constructed this very well as to say, if you're not doing what I suggest, that means you're a racist. And that is exactly what the woke always do. And this kind of thing is what I'm afraid of seeing. And I'm betting it's already somewhere in the US and we probably just haven't seen it yet. But this is coming if it hasn't already. Best practices. Oh, let's read it. Best practices are example of EDI interventions that may be codified in institutional hiring and practices. These best practices support an inclusive excellence framework and they guide the implementation of equitable and meritorious. Equitable and meritorious. You can't fit the two of them together if you're... Good grief. Search processes undertaken to recruit talent from the most diverse applicant pools. Trained equity advisor participates in every committee. Committees are diverse with requisite expertise and critical mass of EDG representation. Equity-deserving groups. All committee members complete unconscious bias and relevant equity anti-racism training. Employment equity gaps are obtained by the committee chair and reviewed by the committee. The Job Act signals a commitment to accessibility, employment equity, inclusive excellence. A consistent, agreed-upon reference letter protocol is established and followed. Both broad and targeted outreach strategies are used to recruit diverse talent. All applicants are invited to self-identify by completing an applicant diversity survey. All applicants are asked to submit statements of contribution to EDI and inclusive excellence. Okay, this is where we get into the murky territory in the U.S. because that could be considered coercive, demanding for it. I know FIRE and the Academic Freedom Alliance and a few different others have spoken out against this. So has Heterodox Academy. I think one of their authors has at least. I would not be doing that. I would not be going to a university that did that, to be honest. I would be absolutely dead set against it. You have no right to weed me out based upon my thoughts on that particular topic. And you have no right to know my thoughts to begin with. You have no right to know my thoughts on any particular topic. Let's see. The evaluation criteria rubric integrates EDI and inclusive excellence contributions. So in other words, you're not being graded based upon your ability at something. Evaluation decisions are thoroughly deliberated to surface any bias or inequities. The diversity of long short lists is tracked to reach in, revisit, and advance strong EDG candidates. In other words, if you stick a candidate on a list that shouldn't be on a list according to the EDG thing, they can reach back and grab it. Grab the candidate, rather. Interview questions include assessment of EDI and inclusive assessment contributions. Okay, so you're asking for a statement for it, and then you want to ask it again in the interview. Employment equity goals are prioritized when multiple finalists are in the zone of excellence. And we're going to go down there and read that in a second. A search summary report is completed after every search process. Appointment offers are made considering equitable negotiation principles. I have no idea what that is, to be honest, but I'm betting it's not great. Strategies are implemented to support, develop, and retain new appointments. Okay, and here's the first star. That's up here with EDG representation. Committees should aim for critical mass of EDG-deserving groups, striving for 50% representation of women and 30% comprising indigenous, racialized persons with disabilities, and members of sexual orientation and gender-identifying minoritized communities. Okay, so in other words, racial quotas are quotas for everything. Quotas for everything. Quotas for everything, qualifications be damned. The concept of a zone of excellence is used to encourage expanded ways to measure excellence, inviting committee members to consider the totality of a prospective candidate's past accomplishments and promise for future research, teaching, service, and leadership and operational excellence within the context of a range of qualifications identified in an evaluation criteria rubric that integrates EDI considerations. The Zone of Excellence framework contemplates that there could be more than one excellent candidate who is deserving and capable of delivering on the expectations that come with filling the role. This framework stands in contrast to the paradigm that there is necessarily one best candidate, which often determined through very narrow and conventional academic conceptualizations of excellence, which have been shown to exclude women, racialized, and indigenous faculty members. So in other words, your zone of excellence thing that you have up here includes EDI stuff in it to that end here. And, you know, it's I don't know of anybody who does evaluations based on merit that says there is only one best candidate, because you can run into candidates for jobs that are very, very qualified just from different kinds of ways, and, you know, different kinds of skills that they bring to the fore. And then that comes up to the judgment of the hiring committee. That's why you have the hiring committee with these things. So pursuing that there is one best candidate, sometimes you don't get that in a job search if you have a lot of great candidates that apply. So that's a false notion right there, that she's presuming that people who do these job searches think that there's only one best candidate. They want a great candidate. They want the absolute best that they can get, but that doesn't mean there's only one best that they'll end up with. They may end up with a lot of great candidates, and then it's a really tough decision for whomever's hiring. That's a great place to be in if you're an employer. Sometimes you like 4 great candidates. Who the hell do I hire? That's the challenge right there. According to Building a Race-Conscious Institution, even fellow administrators must adhere to a 12-point plan in regard to creating a race-conscious university. 3 of these points go directly to the hiring and empowerment of more EDI staffers. Specifically, Ms. El-Shabia stipulates that senior EDI officers such as herself should not only be vested with broad executive powers to act on their own initiative, as noted above, but also to, quote, establish a coordinated, decentralized network of distributed campus-wide leaders who cooperate within a community of practice. Or in other words, a bureaucratic substructure that sits outside the university's ordinary chain of executive command. Does this sound eerily familiar to folks who work at universities now? That this could exist? We have lots of departments of DEI and divisions of DEI now at different universities. I do wonder, I'm oddly wondering. Let's see. Developing a race-conscious institution. Have you strongly articulated a case for diversity which situates equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts as essential to the mission of achieving excellence? Again, some of these things you can't have and still get excellence, at least in the traditional sense of the word. Have you established or designated a senior administrative position tasked with leading institution-wide efforts to strategically advance EDI and anti-racist organizational change? Have you engaged senior leaders and members of governing bodies to develop anti-racist leadership and governance capacities? Have you embraced a data-driven strategic planning, implementation, and evaluation ethos, which values qualitative and quantitative measures and indicators of progress? This is almost oxymoronic because it's just like, that's not something that they use. They don't like data that doesn't meet their own. There's a lot of cherry picking of data that happens in the woke world. I've noticed it very much. Either that, or there's also this, as what Coleman Hughes calls it, and I've described in other videos on this channel, the disparity fallacy, where disparity is presumed to have been the result of discrimination or systemic issues or what have you, when it's not necessarily true. Have you set goals and objectives with measurable outputs, outcomes, and impacts which you regularly monitor and against which you report progress? Have you invested in creating robust, user-friendly central data collection and dissemination systems for more efficient and effective planning and reporting purposes? Have you delegated central and decentralized accountabilities for advancing EDI and anti-racism to key roles across institutional leadership to act as champions? Have you established a model of coordinated decentralization whereby central and local EDI champions communication Communication. Communicate is what you meant? That's a typo. Communicate and collaborate to improve university-wide EDI and anti-racism efforts. Have you developed recruitment and retention policies, procedures, and implementation tools that integrate EDI or anti-racism and inclusive excellence principles and practices? Have you engaged regular climate reviews? Campus climate reviews. Those things are creepy too sometimes. To assess the perceptions and experiences of diverse community members with the ability to disaggregate responses from racialized members. Have you engaged campus-wide communication and continuous improvement processes that support iterative planning, implementation, and evaluation activities? Have you incorporated mechanisms for regular consultation with and engagement of communities most affected by systemic inequities, including racialized community members? You're going to listen to them all because some of them might not agree with this nonsense. Anyway. Radical ideological manias typically flame out quickly because their demonstrated excesses make them unattractive to new recruits. But as building a race-conscious institution helps demonstrate, anti-racism will be different. Its adherents have succeeded in embedding their precepts into the ostensibly neutral administrative machinery of the institutions they serve. This, in turn, has allowed them to expand their powers, inflate their ranks through control of the hiring process, neutralize ideological opponents with the threats of investigation, and even stigmatize doctrinal criticism as a form of bigotry. In short, proponents of this ideology have found a way to neutralize the checks and balances that typically govern the intellectual life of the university. Moreover, they've done it in plain sight while earning six-figure salaries and winning public plaudits for their commitment to social justice. Even if you don't agree with Ms. al-Shabia's ideas, you have to admit that from a purely Machiavellian perspective, her approach is very clearly situated within the zone of excellence. Well, I don't know about zone of excellence, but Machiavellian, definitely. Yeah, see, you understand why I'm concerned about this? This was so loaded with lots of nasty stuff, and I imagine it's somewhere in the U.S. already. We just haven't seen it, to be honest. I would be curious if anybody out there knows, and I could get my hands on it and have a look. But this kind of stuff is really worrying, and the more I read on it, the more I'm inclined to agree that a lot of universities are not salvageable from some of this stuff, that they've gone way too far. And so I am really hoping that things like what I talked about earlier this week, the University of Boston, take off, that there's more things like FAST grants or other ways to fund research in sciences that could be much more beneficial and get us back to the things that science is supposed to be. And so I'm really concerned about a lot of these things, as you can obviously tell, but this one caught my attention, and because this really worries me, because this is actually, you build a race-conscious university. You are then teaching the next generation of scientists at this race-conscious university that their race matters, when in universalism, normative principle of science, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your race is, you can do science, as long as you're following the process. That's the idea of what science is supposed to be, anyway. And yet, you would teach people that their race does matter, and all of these different things, when it clearly doesn't. That's, again, one of the many reasons why this critical theory stuff, and it's been embedding it in the university, is profoundly anti-science. So I'm very curious. I wonder if something like this exists somewhere. I would love to get my hands on it if I did. It would be fun. But I don't know for sure. But anyway, Jonathan Kay gives us a scary view of things going on in Canada. That this is out there, and that 53 different universities are thinking of pulling together something like this with a decentralized hub of... now I know what it reminds me of. A decentralized hub of the DEI people controlling everything, in a sense there. But now I know what it reminds me of. Ibram X. Kendi proposed this some time ago, and it was one of those utterly scary and things like, dear Lord, I hope not kind of situations. He proposed having a fourth branch of the U.S. government, the Department of Anti-Racism, that would have power over the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch to basically throw out anything that was not deemed anti-racist enough. This is the kind of, that's what this reminds me of. It's just at a university level. So be very wary of what comes next, because this kind of thing where this is very totalitarian, this is not conservative. I very much disagree with Jonathan Kay. This is not conservative in any stretch of the imagination. But this is extremely authoritarian. And very Marxian. Critical theory is very Marxian. With that dialectic. So this is scary, is what it is. Very scary. Anyway, that's it. I hope you like this video. If you like the video, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the video, hit the like, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button on the way out the door, and all that jazz. And of course, pop on over to shiasophia.locals.com and we'll do Thursday Thoughts again this Thursday. And I'm thinking of some new things to do in the community. But if you'd like to come in here and have chats about science without the craziness, consider becoming a supporter at shiasophia.locals.com. That's it for now. I'm Adrian. Until next time, stay curious, my friends.